Good evening, everyone. It's great to have such a nice, large audience here for a very important meeting of the Higher Purpose Forum. And we have a really important agenda this evening. But before we begin with the program, just like to explain that tonight we have two organizations hosting our event. First is Higher Purpose Forum, as usual. But secondly, I'm very pleased to be co-hosting tonight's meeting with a new organization called the International Freedom Alliance. And they will be co-hosting tonight and providing one of the speakers. And in order to begin properly, I'd like to ask Dr. Frank Kaufman, who's the Senior Executive Vice President of IFA, to tell us a little bit about the organization as we begin tonight's meeting.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thanks for the invitation to be here and to be a co-host of this event. You've been doing the Higher Purpose Forum meetings with great success for many years. And as a fledgling organization, it's a great opportunity for us. So I thank you for the chance to do this together with you. Many people on the call are familiar with the International Freedom Alliance. Although it's very new, it stands on the foundation of a long history of what in the 20th century, from the 60s through the early 90s, was the anti-communist work of a very significant coalition of people concerned primarily with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell in 89 and 90, along with much of the Western communist effort, at least on the state regime level. There wasn't sufficient enough attention paid to that, and there emerged or persisted communist activity, Marxist and post-Marxist activity that continues to flourish today at the state and regime level, most centrally in the work of the CCP. So the International Freedom Alliance is in certain ways a resurrection of the very vigorous, very well-funded and highly invested work of what was called the VOC, Victory Over Communism movement of the late 20th century. And once it was finally dawned on a number of the people that in a certain way we fell asleep at the wheel, communism remains, and not only communism, but many other forms of tyranny. So in order to resuscitate and bring that work up with gale force, with urgent force, we founded the International Freedom Alliance. The basic premise of the Freedom Alliance, of the IFA, is that probably the best government structure for governing a nation where the citizens are radically free, philosophically radically free, is the United States of America. It identifies freedom as endowed by God and as a part of a collection of inalienable rights. And so with the human conscience as higher than any other authority on earth, my own private conscience, and building a government around that concept, the United States has been a beacon for individual liberty, personal sovereignty, and freedom. It's our contention that every culture has at its roots, or as it has the resources. So in America, that concept of freedom and liberty was derived from Judeo-Christian Western civilizational roots. But every culture has sufficient resources in its roots to generate the same type of radical liberty for its citizens, in which they stand above any other governing force. So the International Freedom Alliance is an effort to translate, not to export American culture per se, but to export the commitment to radical individual sovereignty that can grow out of any cultural origin, including China, including Iran, including Germany, France, and England, any place where tyrannies tend to arise. There's the wherewithal to establish a style of government in which the sovereign individual is higher than any form of government tyranny. That's the goal and purpose and design of the International Freedom Alliance. It invests in education, it invests in networks and alliances, and in leadership training. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Jim, to explain the purpose and direction of this organization.
Well, thank you for being here. And one of the senior advisors of IFA will be the respondent for this evening's program. Before we begin the program, I'd like to just try to see if I can be a little helpful. It's very hard, in my opinion, to keep up with all the with news about what's going on in some of these frontline situations today, because the mainstream media gets it wrong almost all the time. And so I search high and low for good sources. And I just would like to put up on the screen here a little my recommendations as some of the best sources that you can follow on a daily basis in order to try to keep up with events in China, specifically within the CCP, and also in Iran. I hope this is helpful for our audience. To follow the CCP, I listened to Lay's Real Talk. Lay is our speaker this evening, and she produces 3 live streams every week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Also, Bill Gertz, who's also spoken on this program, is a great source. He is at the Washington Times, and also there's a YouTube channel sponsored by Epoch Times called American Thought Leaders, which is another really good source. And for Iran, for our audience, I would recommend these 2 ladies, Emily Schrader and Elika Labon. They're both brilliant women who have a real good insight in exactly what's going on inside Iran today. Much more insightful and well-informed than what I find in the mainstream media. So I just want to share. I hope that's helpful information for our audience tonight. Now I'd like to introduce our main speaker, who we're all waiting to hear from, Lay, the host of Lay's Real Talk. Lay is a great source of inside information on what's going on in the CCP. And I'm so happy. I feel like I really am up to date now because of her on what's going on in China. And about a week after Lay explained something to us on her broadcast, I finally read about it in the Wall Street Journal.
All right, maybe they follow me. Well, thank you.
Lay has 432,000 subscribers. The last time she came on this show, she had 420, I think. So she's gaining popularity fast. She's got 1,200 videos posted. She's been doing this for 5 years, and everyone is packed with content. And she's had so far 92 million views. So she is very widely followed. And actually, last week, the people at American Thought Leaders both concurred that she's their favorite source of information. I don't know if you saw that, Lay. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that was really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
So let's welcome, Lay's going to talk about the United Front Works Department of the Chinese Communist Party and what they do to infiltrate and influence governance around the world. And she's going to focus primarily on the U.S., Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Thank you, Lay.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dr. Kaufman, for having me. So let's get started. I will focus on 4 countries: the United States, Taiwan, and then South Korea and Japan. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about how China's intelligence system actually works and the core strategy behind CCP operations, because I think that's important. So let's begin with how China actually structures its intelligence network. Because the United Front operation is only the front, but behind that, there's a whole network. So according to insider accounts, Chinese intelligence personnel broadly fall into 3 categories. The first type is called 密工. They are full-time professional spies, and these individuals are officially employed within the military intelligence, state security, or public security, or even the United Front operations. They're trained, disciplined, and operate as career intelligence officers. And this is what most people imagine when they think of a spy. And then the second type is called 商干. The literal translation is really like business affiliates, but they're really semi or part-time official operatives. Now, these individuals exist in the gray zone, and their names may or may not be registered in China's intelligence systems, but they are, but they're not fully part of the formal bureaucracy. And within this category, there are actually two subtypes. The first subtype is closer to a professional spy. These individuals may be listed in the intelligence system and may hold a minimum salary recognized by the system. Even if they don't actively collect the salary, it may be still recorded. And in some cases, their families could receive the money or the compensation if something happens to them in the course of intelligence work. So in structure and function, they are almost like part-time or auxiliary intelligence officers. Now, the second subtype is very different. These individuals are not professional spies, and they're not registered on any intelligence database. And they may not even engage in any intelligence work at all. Instead, they use their connections with intelligence departments to conduct business. And because these agencies can grant special privileges and help elevate these individuals' status as business executives, these connections can be extremely profitable. So with that backing, these quote-unquote agents can become successful or extreme. Actually, many of them are very successful business figures, and therefore gain access to the business elites, or not just business, the elite circle or political elite overseas. So, and in return, they may contribute financially to intelligence activities. And this model, this group of people is heavily utilized or deployed in one of CCP's strategies called use business to support intelligence, which I will explain later. And this group is large, and many of the wealthy Chinese businessmen or business people operating overseas are believed to fall into this category. And then there's the third type, and it's the most widespread, and it's called 挂靠, or affiliates. These individuals are not formal agents or trained spies. They are ordinary people like you and me, but they attach themselves to intelligence-linked networks. In exchange, they gain political protection, access, influence, or business advantages. This is the largest group and also the most difficult to detect. So let me give you an example. There's a famous Chinese business tycoon. His name is Miles Guo. In Chinese, it's Guo Wengui. If you have followed Chinese news, you probably have heard of this name. He has been interviewed by mainstream Western media. Now, he denies being a formal intelligence operative. Some people believe he was the second category, 商干, given his background as a business tycoon. But he himself admits being an affiliate. However, even as an affiliate, he is considered very high profile and unusual because his connection was directly tied to Ma Jian, a former vice minister of state security. So here you have an example of someone who's a business tycoon, but who fits into those three categories. He's either category number 2 or number 3. I think he's category number 2. All right, so now let's talk about the strategy. So when we talk about Chinese intelligence, we're not just talking about spies in the traditional sense or united front operation. alone. We're really talking about a multi-layered system where intelligence, business, and political power are deeply intertwined. And this system didn't emerge randomly. It reflects a broader strategy framework. And it's often attributed back to the 1990s during China's early period of economic reform. And it's associated with a former CMC. CMC stands for Central Military Commission. So a former CMC vice chairman, Zhang Wannian, came up with a strategy that has guided Chinese influence campaigns or influence operations for decades. So the first strategy is called 军民结合, integrate military and civilian resources. Second one is 内外并举, operate both domestically and internationally, or integrate domestic and international operations. And then the third is 长短兼顾, meaning balance short-term and long-term objectives. The last one is 以商养亲, use business to support intelligence. So in plain English, it means integrate military and civilian efforts, and then operate both domestically and overseas, and then balance short-term and long-term goals. These are all, I mean, they're pretty straightforward. You can understand what it means. But the last one, right, use business to support intelligence, I think is the most distinctive element in CCP's strategy. This is where things diverge sharply from traditional spy systems. Now, CCP's goal is to make spy operation be financially self-sufficient. It's self-funding. Therefore, commercial entities are set up as a cover. Agents are established as business executives or even tycoons operating business in foreign countries. And so this type of business entities serve as one, funding channels. Two, they cover their identities. And because of their business success or business status, the business becomes an effective platform for access and influence and to engage Western powerhouse. And that's why you get a system where, that's the strategy behind CCP's system, where intelligence, business, and state power are deeply intertwined. Now that we've understand CCP's strategy and structure, let's move on to its tactics. Of course, these tactics vary from country to country, but the underlying logic remains the same. I will first talk about the two countries that are most important to the CCP in terms of intelligence gathering and influence campaigns. They are the United States and Taiwan. Now, in the US, the focus is commercial and technological. In Taiwan, the focus is political and sovereignty related. The goals are different, but strategic importance and tactics are often the same. So let me talk about the United States. I want to focus on how CCP carries it out. The CCP focuses on research and educational institutions, the business community, including high-tech manufacturing, Wall Street, and media. The people the CCP relies on to carry out this its influence campaigns include its large network of affiliates. The category number 3, right, the type 3 of its intelligence hierarchy. And that network resides in the diaspora community and also the Chinese students in the US. By tightly controlling Chinese American organizations such as hometown associations, alumni associations, trade associations, Chinese schools, professional associations, and even churches, the CCP influence within the Chinese American community is significant. And another important tool CCP uses is the app WeChat. Over at least 90% of mainland Chinese people living in the US use WeChat. And because WeChat operates within China-controlled system, it functions as a surveillance and influence platform. As long as people use WeChat, they are within that ecosystem. And often these individuals help push CCP narratives without even being aware of it. And then the second tactic, so the first tactic is by controlling the diaspora community in the US. And the second tactic is by sending large numbers of people they control. They can either control or influence into key US institutions and corporations. These people may or may not be spies, but they are individuals the CCP can control or influence. Two areas that have employed many such Chinese professionals are Wall Street and mainstream media. If you actually look into journalists covering China in major Western media outlets, you may find that their family backgrounds can create pressure that discourages reporting that's critical of the CCP. And this does not necessarily mean that CCP has direct control over these media outlets, but they have enough influence to shape what is reported and what is not. So in that sense, both mainstream media and Wall Street are areas where CCP influence is a concern. If you really study who they have hired in those organizations, you'll see a large number of CCP's third and fourth generation princelings working there. Yeah, and that's the and even when Wall Street has realized this, I mean, they can't just fire all these individuals. These people have been working in those areas for decades, so you can't just get rid of them overnight. Another area is universities and schools. Many of them have received funding or endowments from Chinese sources. The CCP has also been attempting to cultivate relationships. I mean, the whole subject of CCP's influence in American universities and higher education institutions, that's a whole subject in itself. I'm not going to go into detail. There are actually many reportings on that subject. But what I will say is this: almost the so-called American elite class has been the subject of CCP's influence campaign. And the way they do that, and there are three primary methods the regime deploys to influence or to build leverages over these foreign elites. The first is money. However, many of these individuals are already very wealthy, so money alone may not be sufficient. And the second is personal relationships, including targeted romantic relationships. Take a look, some very high-profile, high-tech tycoons have Chinese spouses or other close personal ties. Look around. 20 years ago, you know that one of the hottest jobs in New York City was Chinese-speaking nannies. Wealthy families in New York are willing to pay six-digit salaries to hire Chinese nannies who speak Chinese to teach their children. Well, just think who those people are that they've hired, right? Yeah, Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump, has a Chinese nanny. And her daughter, I think Marabella, speaks great fluent Mandarin. So in the late 1990s and then the early 2000s, if you speak Chinese, people like me, we could be hot. We were being offered an astronomical amount of money just to be nannies working for those families. So just imagine these people could be under the influence of the CCP. So, and the latest example is what? Larry Ellison, right? Who's in his 80s. He married a Chinese wife who's what, 34 years old? I don't know, 34 at the time when they were married. So she's 50 years younger. Well, this does not mean that these individuals, these Chinese spouses, are spies. That's not what I'm saying. But their views on China can be manipulated by Beijing. And the fact that their families are still living in China also provides Beijing with potential leverage. And that's the risk. Now, when money and relationships are not enough, there is what some describe as a secret weapon. That's the third tactic or third, third method. And that is, this involves offering access to China's vast organ transplant system or exclusive longevity programs. Didn't Xi Jinping talk to Vladimir Putin on September the 3rd during the military parade when the two walked down? And they were talking about the possibility of living to 150 years old. So the CCP has these elaborate programs that help their leaders to live to 150. I mean, the goal is 120 years old. So many people desire better health, longer life, and a youthful appearance. These offerings, which may not be permitted in rule-based systems, can be very attractive. And these programs are not sourced ethically and are typically reserved for top CCP leadership only. But they may also be extended to influential global elites as incentives. Now, there have been claims about Chinese-founded stem cell companies recruiting clients and promoting their services in places like New York. I have been told their companies based in Long Island, New York, and they're actively hiring people to handle their marketing. These therapies are often marketed as highly effective. Why? Because they're potent. Some reports suggest that these sources involve unethical practices linked to illicit operations in places such as Myanmar and Cambodia. These products are sold to wealthy individuals at hefty prices. They involve, some of these stem cells are illegally harvested from babies, from young children and babies. These are just, that's a different subject I won't get into, but they're illicitly sourced. Now, they're very expensive. They're offered exclusively. But if someone agrees to cooperate with the CCP, such services may be offered at no cost. So this is a clear example of CCP's intelligence model. If those high-end stem cell services that exist in New York, I'm not saying they are, but if they are actually funded and operated by the CCP, then here's the model that I told you about. They are using business to support intelligence. In this case, stem cell companies operate as private businesses, but may also function as platforms to reach and influence Western elites. The revenue supports the broader network, while the services create leverage. The business also collects a lot of data from their clients, right? So if you really think about it, it's very ironic. Many of these, in today's culture, almost everything that we buy has a label that says ethically sourced. Yet some of these very high-end services are not ethical at all if they're backed by the CCP. Now, in the US, the CCP's United Front operations are carried out on a legal and subtle manner, making them very difficult to detect. Diaspora community serves as the backbone of those efforts. So from there, Chinese Americans may engage with American targets through business activities, educational cooperation, cultural exchanges, and all of these activities are legal, but they can all serve the purpose of building influence by offering benefits that are difficult to refuse. And the CCP, I must say, is highly strategic and patient. It is willing to wait. After a few years, once a person has developed some level of dependence, whether through business ties, personal relationships, or other benefits, then the CCP may begin to test that person. If the individual refuses, the relationship may continue to be cultivated. If the individual shows willingness, then they may be asked to do something small at first, something within their power. For example, a politician might be asked to oppose a certain bill, or a media professional might be asked to publish content that improves China's image. Many people fall into this pattern gradually because you think, well, that's not a big deal. Yes, of course I can write an editorial. You know. Now, if someone refuses completely and strongly, the CCP may simply cut ties and move on, or it may threaten that person. It depends on what kind of leverage they have. So this is the general pathway through which the CCP builds influence globally. One story I heard is, the Beijing is very interested in Silicon Valley key targets. And there have been reports suggesting that Beijing has developed a plan, or they have already implemented a plan targeting programmers in Silicon Valley by sending individuals to build personal relationships. The idea is that if someone suddenly forms an unexpected close relationship, it may not be a coincidence. And I think Elon Musk even has posted, he said that if she is a 10, then that means you are a target, right? If you suddenly, meet this gorgeous woman who is a 10, then that means you're CCP's target. Now, I also want to talk about election. Beijing certainly wants to influence American elections, but its ability to shape grassroots politics remains limited. Unlike Taiwan and Japan and South Korea, which are smaller countries, it's easier for Beijing to influence local politics, and Beijing has been successful in those countries. But in the US, influence local politics is relatively more difficult. Therefore, attention has shifted towards election systems. A Chinese affiliated company called CONEC, founded by Chinese American Eugene Yu, has drawn attention. Its software was used in multiple US jurisdictions during the 2020 election. The company has a counterpart in China that provides election services to China's political system, like the National People's Congress election uses the same system. The company also has faced accusations of leaking election workers' data to China. I covered CONEC's connection to the CCP in a program as early as 2021. You can check it out. So that's what I will say for the US. Let's now talk about Taiwan. In Taiwan, the CCP's focus is mostly on political apparatus, the military, and the media. Because both mainland and Taiwan share the same language, Beijing has placed a very high priority on shaping Taiwan's media and social media landscape because it has a language advantage. It doesn't have this advantage in US, Japan, or South Korea. So over time, it has made significant inroads. Mainland Chinese programming is widely available in Taiwan. And if you go to Taiwan today, you'll see people watching content from mainland China everywhere. At the same time, parts of Taiwan's mainstream media are often described as very pro-Beijing. Now, unlike mainland China, Taiwan does not currently impose a blanket ban on Chinese social media platforms. The general public can still access apps like WeChat, Weibo, and Douyin. However, the public sector agencies and officials are banned from using Chinese products or platforms due to security concerns. So overall, Taiwan maintains an open internet environment, allowing its citizens access to Chinese content and platforms. But the long-term impact of this openness is, in my mind, detrimental. I believe that platforms like WeChat should be banned or should be at least restricted in Taiwan and also in the US. It's banned in India. India banned WeChat and TikTok in 2020, and I think that's a very smart move. So I think it should be banned. WeChat should be banned in the US because if you do not, because when you ban WeChat in the US, you disrupt the communication of CCP's intelligence operative because they rely on WeChat to communicate domestically and internationally, right? When you ban WeChat overseas, then they need to communicate through other platforms. So I think WeChat, if we want to disrupt CCP's intelligence operations in other countries, we should ban WeChat there. Otherwise, you're giving them a tool to communicate, to communicate with each other. You actually facilitate one of their strategies, which is integration of domestic and foreign operations. Now, the second area of focus in Taiwan is political establishment. The CCP has worked extensively through United Front channels to build influence. Today, Taiwan's legislature is controlled by an opposition alliance, including the KMT and the TPP, which are often seen as pro-Beijing. Actually, they have grown to be very pro-Beijing. This has led to political gridlock, including debates over armed procurement from Washington. As a result, President William Lai faces significant constraints, I should say, in advancing certain policies. And also, unlike in many other countries where influence efforts concentrate mainly on elites, in Taiwan, there is also a strong grassroots component. Local officials, like village chiefs, who play an important role in local elections by mobilizing voters, they have been systematically targeted. The CCP has systematically invited them to visit the mainland under the banner of cultural exchange. So with travel expenses covered, and these efforts are typically carried out very quietly and over a long period of time. And this is scary. And the third area in Taiwan is military intelligence. In one espionage case, there was an incident involving Taiwan's presidential security detail. Investigations reveal that some Taiwanese soldiers recruited as spies were required to swear allegiance to China. And the process was recorded on video. Yeah. these videos are leaked.
Yeah.
So that just shows you how blatant, right, the CCP is. And then in December 2024, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense received a tip-off alleging that personnel from the military police 211th Battalion, which is a unit responsible for presidential security, had sold military information to Chinese intelligence agents in exchange for about 440,000 renminbi yuan, which is roughly about 60,000 US dollars. Now, if intelligence networks can reach into a unit tasked with protecting the president, it highlights just how deeply these CCP operations can penetrate in Taiwan. Okay, now let's turn to South Korea and Japan. There are many things I can tell you about South Korea and Japan, but I want to pick on the aspect that I think are most worrisome. In South Korea, it's the election. Now, I said that controlling foreign elections has always been high on CCP's agenda. That's clearly the goal in Taiwan. But Taiwan's election is very interesting because it uses the most manual process. All the ballots are manually tabulated by human beings and in front of the public. So you cannot, and people actually line up with ID to vote. So they can't really manipulate the election system. But let's talk about South Korea because I think it's the same. Let's take a look at what happened in South Korea so other countries can take precautions. Now, of all the democratic countries in Asia, South Korea may be the most deeply infiltrated by the CCP. In some ways, the situation there is even more concerning than in Japan or Taiwan. Taiwan's situation is serious, but Taiwanese society has long been exposed to CCP's pressure and intimidation, and that exposure has created a certain level of awareness and vigilance, which acts as a natural defense. That same level of public awareness does not fully exist in South Korea. At the same time, South Korea is geographically closer to China and economically dependent on it. And many of its politicians have traditionally avoided direct confrontation with Beijing. And all of this makes the situation more fragile and sometimes worrisome. Let me talk about the election. Now, South Korea has a population of 51 million people. Among them, there are roughly 800,000 to 1 million Chinese nationals. Some people say there are more. In simple terms, for every 100 people you see in South Korea, about 2 are Chinese. And that's not a trivial number, especially when you consider potential political and social influence. Let's look at the economic layer and the trend it's going, the trajectory it's going. So in 2011, I'm going to give you some numbers. Foreigners own about 72,000 housing units in South Korea. By 2020, that number had grown to 157,000 units, an increase of 2.2 times in less than a decade. Among those buyers, Chinese buyers grew the fastest. According to South Korean media, over the past decade, the number of Chinese buyers increased by about 16 times. And data from South Korea's Supreme Court registry shows that purchases of apartments, villas, and office buildings, so means residential and commercial properties by Chinese nationals, surged from 648 units in 2011 to 16,000 units in recent years, a staggering increase about, 35 times? I'm sorry, 25 times. I think it's 25 times. So what's driving this? Well, South Korea's own policy. The country has a real estate investment immigration program. and that was introduced in 2010. Under this system, foreigners who invest in designated properties can obtain permanent residency. More than 90% of those who gained residency through this program are Chinese nationals. And after holding permanent residency for 3 years, they can vote in South Korea. And now let's consider the political impact. In the 2022 presidential election, about 44 million voters cast their ballots. President Yoon Suk-yeol won by a margin of roughly 250,000 votes. Meanwhile, there were about 100,000 Chinese nationals with permanent residency and local voting rights. Imagine that. The margin was only 250,000 votes, and there were 100,000 Chinese nationals in South Korea who were eligible to vote in 2022. And in some local margins, in some local regions, the margin is very tiny. So these Chinese nationals can flip the election results. So when you look at these numbers side by side, you begin to understand why some South Koreans are very concerned. The warning is that if the current trends continue, particularly with more individuals obtaining residency and citizenship, China could potentially gain significant influence over South Korea in the coming years. And at the same time, there are pro-Beijing politicians who have proposed policies such as accepting large numbers of ethnic Korean migrants from China and allowing foreigners with voting rights to join political parties. And they also want to simplify entry procedures for foreign students and granting work visas to their parents. So if these trends continue without adjustments, South Korea could face serious long-term challenges to its political independence. All right, so that's what I'll say about South Korea, among other things. Now let's turn to Japan. Let me tell you a story from a decade ago. In 2015, a Japanese woman traveling to Shanghai on a business trip was suddenly arrested by Chinese authorities. And then sources in both Japan and China later revealed that the reason this woman was arrested was because between 2012 and 2013, that was 2 to 3 years before she was arrested, she had multiple conversations in Tokyo with personnel from the Chinese embassy. They discussed the highly sensitive sovereignty dispute over the what Chinese call Diaoyu Islands, and known in Japan as Senkaku Islands. After learning China's position, this woman relayed the content of those conversations to 2 Japanese government officials. Now, information she relayed were not sensitive information at all. But after a few years, while on a business trip to Shanghai, she was abruptly detained. She was held in China for several years until 2019, when she was sentenced by Shanghai's High Court to 6 years in prison on espionage charges. Now, the fact that she was arrested for actions that took place in Japan shocked Japanese society. The case highlighted the reach of China's long-arm jurisdiction and raised concerns about possible CCP collaborators within Japan. Because the information she shared with the Japanese officials did not involve Chinese state secrets, or they wouldn't given it to her, but she was still charged and imprisoned. This was a decade ago. People were already concerned with China's infiltration in Japanese government. Since then, the number of Chinese nationals entering Japan has grown astronomically, and concerns about influence have intensified. Public awareness has also increased, or I should say, surged, but political response was relatively slow until the emergence of a new leadership. After the new Prime Minister, Tsunai Takaichi, formed her cabinet, there was an online poll in Japan asking people which policy should be prioritized. Out of 480,000 respondents, 61% chose anti-espionage legislation, even above economic concerns.
Mm.
So that just shows you the widespread concern in Japanese society. So now the Japanese government is reportedly planning to establish a national intelligence agency to coordinate intelligence efforts across departments. It's also preparing anti-espionage legislation and a Foreign Agents Registration Act, which would require individuals working on behalf of foreign governments to register. Because these countries like South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, they didn't go through the Cold War, so they don't have legislation that protects the country from foreign infiltration. So this shift reflects growing concern about infiltration and national security risks. Here's an interesting question. How many Chinese spies do you think are in Japan? There's a 2017 report. It's actually the Chinese report. It's the Global Times, the state mouthpiece. The Global Times referenced a Japanese magazine which claimed that 50,000 Chinese nationals were in Japan and they were spies. So 50,000 Chinese spies were in Japan as of 2017. While the number was debated, the discussion itself highlights the level of concern. Analysts note that due to the lack of comprehensive anti-espionage laws, Japan has been relatively accessible for intelligence operations. So the way they organize these intelligence networks is no different from the United States. So according to Japanese journalist by the name of Kensaku Tokito, Chinese intelligence networks in Japan are centered around the embassy in Tokyo and consulates in cities such as Sapporo, Niigata, Nagoya, Osaka. And these networks are supported by Chinese community organizations. It's very similar to the United States and the diaspora community, and may involve a wide range of individuals, from students and professionals to service workers, forming extensive networks. So, and there are also reports saying that the Chinese spy operations specifically targeted Japan's self-defense force bases, deploying Chinese women, young Chinese women, using everyday interactions to build relationships and gather information. And marriage has also been described as one channel of influence. So from what I read, these young women would just stay near the base and wait until a rainy day, and they will walk up to these servicemen and politely ask for an umbrella, to share an umbrella, because it's raining and they didn't bring an umbrella. And so these young men just fell into these traps. So a lot of them are actually married. Now, Chinese, let me just give you, according to some statistics I saw, of the 500, there were 500 servicemen who are married to a foreign spouse. There are 500, and they're across all service branches. Of the 500 servicemen who have a foreign spouse, 70% of them are Chinese. That just shows you the majority of them are Chinese. Now, I want to end my talk with a very, very interesting anecdote, or two anecdotes shared by Japanese diplomats. The first one is a former UN advisor whose name is Hirofumi Ono. Recently, a video of his interview went viral in Japan, because in the interview, he described a personal encounter with what he believed was a honey trap during a visit to China. What happened was he returned to his hotel and found that a woman was waiting for him on his bed. But the young woman looked exactly like the actress that this diplomat admired. And this young woman spoke fluent Japanese. So Uno said that he had been warned in advance about such tactics. But even though at the time he wasn't even sure if that was the actress herself, but because he was warned, he knew immediately that it was a setup. And he later reflected that once someone accepts the Chinese dessert, he calls this the Chinese dessert, he said then they will become compromised. And that warning, he said, stayed with him. And there was a lighter anecdote, and this one is like hilarious. In 2022, there was a Japanese media tycoon who told the story about a former Japanese PM, Shinzo Abe. In one story, Shinzo Abe, he wasn't PM at the time, and he went to China. He and the Japanese PM at the time, who was, I think, Kumizu. So Kumizu was the PM, and Shinzo Abe went with him to China on a visit. And after the formal meetings, they went to their rooms. And Koizumi, I'm sorry, I pronounced his name right, Koizumi. When Koizumi returned to his hotel room, he found a group of young women waiting in his room. Well, Abe found a group of young men. Why Abe saw a group of young men? That was because previously the Chinese has repeatedly arranged young women in his hotel rooms, trying to trap him, but he never fell. So the Chinese thought that he was not interested in women, that he was interested in men. So that time when he went to China, they had a group of young men in his room waiting for him. So that just tells you the level. I mean, this is, we're not talking about a private business people, we're talking about Japanese officials. So when you step back, and I want to compare South Korea and Japan. There's an interesting contrast. Both countries are US allies. Both are advanced democracies. Both are exposed to CCP influence. But the level of vulnerability and the response are different in Japan and South Korea. South Korea's exposure is deeper at a societal and structural level. It has closer economic dependence on China, a larger Chinese population presence, and a political environment that has often avoided direct confrontation. At the same time, political awareness or public awareness in South Korea has not fully caught up with the scale of the issue. And that combination, high exposure and lower vigilance, is what makes the situation particularly concerning in South Korea. Japan, on the other hand, has historically been more cautious towards China, and Beijing's constant hostility and harassment toward Japan has helped the country stay vigilant, actually. So even though infiltration concerns exist, Japan has created a more defensive posture. So now, yeah, so that's my comparison of the two countries. And if you really look at I think Taiwan also, because of CCP's constant harassment, there's a significant part of Taiwanese society that has remained vigilant, despite another part being infiltrated. So I do not worry that much about Taiwan. And the United States is a much bigger country for the CCP to infiltrate. And there's also a culture difference between China and the US. So technically, it's more difficult for CCP to infiltrate. So that's all I have. Did I talk for 40 minutes already or even more? All right, that's all.
Okay, good. Thank you, Lei, very much. Lei, very quickly, you remember back when Zheng Lejia was first arrested, there was this article in the Wall Street Journal that came out like a week after the arrest or the detainment, and it explained that the basis for the arrest was him providing nuclear secrets to the United States government.
Yeah.
And
the Wall Street Journal absolutely is infiltrated by the CCP. How do I know that? Because before the 20th Party Congress, all the major media outlets, Chinese or Western, we're trying to predict who will make it to the Politburo Standing Committee, the 7-person top body. Everybody got it wrong except the Wall Street Journal. What does that tell you? They have access to Xi Jinping because Xi Jinping changed the leadership lineup the last minute. Otherwise, he would not have escorted Hu Jintao out of this off the stage.
So there's a journalist inside the Wall Street Journal that is sort of compromised.
When we saw that, we know, well, the Wall Street Journal have direct access to Xi Jinping.
And that's the deal. If you want access to Xi Jinping, you have to convey the information that the CCP wants to be conveyed.
Of course, yeah. Right? I mean, it's not like they have access to the foreign ministry. If they have access to some level they have direct access to Xi Jinping. Otherwise, how do they know the plan that Xi Jinping has in mind that he wants to put in the last minute? Even a lot of the officials didn't know.
They look pretty foolish because they're the only ones that carried that story, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, but then, yeah, they shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, they just bit the bait, hook, line, and sinker, and swallowed it.
Yeah.
Frank, would you like to raise any issues with Lei?
Perhaps in the other parts of the program so that it can move, the program can continue. I was enormously educated. I could listen to Lei all day, but just to keep the program rolling, and then if there's time afterward, I do have questions.
Yes. Okay. So could you introduce Gerry for us?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Just before I do, I'd like to, the one thing I had omitted is the URL of the Freedom Alliance. So it's freedomalliance.net. Freedomalliance.net is the URL of the International Freedom Alliance, which I introduced at the top of the hour. My job here is now to introduce Gerry Willis. I'll confess that Gerry is a new acquaintance to me. I've known of Gerry all my life, and we've only recently had the blessing and pleasure of making each other's acquaintance. So I do suspect he's quite a remarkable person to know, but I can't do that yet. It's a new relationship. So that being the case, I'm going to read his introduction so that I don't omit important aspects of why he's eminently qualified to be in the position he is with us here tonight. Gerry spent 32 years living and working throughout Asia as a lawyer, business leader, and investor. He served as an executive in 4 U.S. Fortune 100 corporations and as an attorney in New York's Milbank, Tweed, and Hadley and McCoy. In short, Gerry was 32 years living and working in the mainland, mediating and papering up massive deals with U.S. Business in the mainland, all throughout our smart moves and our dumb moves to the billions of dollars has been under Gerry's observation and legal requirements. And his knowledge of China is quite unique in that capacity. It's intimate, it's not scholarly. So with that, I'd just like to get out of the way and allow Gerry to offer his commentary on what we've just heard. Thank you very much.
Gerry, did you live in Shanghai and Hong Kong? Am I remembering that correctly?
In Hong Kong, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Beijing, so Singapore, Seoul, a lot of time in India, so throughout the region. Well, thank you, Frank and Ms. Lay. I have to say, I wish you were doing this program when I was back in college. My professor of Chinese studies program was a fan of Mao Zedong, and he subjected us to numerous Chinese propaganda films about happy peasant farmers and laborers. And I remember once I wrote, I had to be careful because I was a bit of a grade hog. I wrote on one of my examinations, I referenced the early 60s, 62 mass famine caused basically by Mao policies that led to up to 20 million deaths. And he wrote in big red letters, "That's not proven." So the way I had to learn about China was to go to the library, and then in the summer, the Library of Congress, to find out why whatever he was teaching was wrong. So I can't imagine what it's like these days if that was the case so long ago. I would like to add some general comments about this topic, but first, let me address one of the matters mentioned in the promotional material for this program, because I know it's an issue of great concern for many of our listeners, namely the role China has played in the campaign against the Unification Church and other religions in both Japan and in Korea. The evidence is overwhelming, both public and, from my sources, classified, that China, through an organization called the Anti-Xiejiao Association, has been involved with, encouraged, and supported the persecution of the Unification Church in Japan and in Korea. In Japan, as early as 1978, the chairman of the Communist Party of Japan decreed that the extermination of the Unification Church is a sacred battle that makes necessary a total fight in areas of mass struggle, ideology, parliament, and law. In 2022, they finally got their wish when the government initiated dissolution proceedings. The Communist Party chairman then declared, "This is the final war against the Unification Church. This time we will never give up." And after the dissolution order earlier this month, the Anti-Xiejiao Association expressed its satisfaction that the Unification Church is being dissolved as, quote, "a tool of anti-communist ideology." And in Korea, the Anti-Xiejiao officials met with pastors, scholars, leftist activists from Japan and Korea to share insights about how to repress religious groups like the Unification Church and revise Korea laws to bring churches in general under greater control. As far as I can tell, no one in the Japanese or Korean government or media organizations seems to be asking the question, are we doing China's work for it? So one of the first points I would like to make is that for further study and analysis, we need to answer a broader question. Why do citizens of democratic countries, including intellectuals, the media, and even the general public, keep falling for World Front organizations? Ms. Fay has answered that in great detail, but I'm sure there's much more to say about it. A second point worth exploring is what I call mirror imaging by apologists for the bad acts of communist regimes. In other words, Promoting one's values and accomplishments is something many countries endeavor to do. And people point out what's the difference between what we're doing in America and what the Chinese are doing in the world. But there is a difference between US efforts at public diplomacy and those of China in both scope, degree, purpose, and method. China's United Front work is designed to ensure the success of the CCP's cause. Unfortunately, that cause is a Manichaean one of us versus them, whereby the United Front organization seek to, quote, unite all the forces that can be united to thwart our enemies from abroad. Moreover, the techniques employed by the government and ruling party in its United Front organizations intentionally and systematically breach acceptable norms, crossing the line from a benign form of public diplomacy to activities that foreign policy experts have labeled as covert, coercive, and corrupt, that have no analog in our own country's behavior. Ms. Ley has pointed out several of those, and there are many more. And the third and final point I'd mention is that the United Front activities are only one aspect of an integrated whole of government approach to enhancing its power. The author of US containment policy during the Cold War, George Kennan, defined this whole of government approach as, quote, political warfare by employment of all the means at the nation's command, short of war, to achieve national objectives. One of these levers, the international system, that for reshaping the international system in its image, is an area of which I'm particularly versed, and I was very grateful for Ms. Ley pointing it out, and I look forward to scrolling through those 1,000 programs to find a discussion on this. But that is in the area of economics, and not just by recruiting people abroad and foreign and non-Chinese companies, but actually by leveraging access to the Chinese market based upon political compliance by corporations. Wang Xiaochuan, the head of an internet company and member of the United Front consultative body, put it this way: if you see the situation clearly and are able to move with the state, you will get great support. But if you want to sing a different tune, you might suffer. I could speak for hours about my experience, how Chinese policy impacts doing business in China. But luckily for you, I won't, because I'm limited to just a few minutes. So what is to be done? Western democracies face disadvantages in addressing China's United Front strategy. China, under the rule of the CCP, possesses ideological depth and consistency rooted in Marxism-Leninism, which animate its strategy and impose discipline in its approach. Communist doctrine gives communist governments a ready-made goal, a political revolutionary framework for analyzing events, and operational guidelines for planning and implementing policies, both before and after coming to power. Ms. Ley noted the role of government, both in the United States and in Japan, for neutralizing the United Front's work and responding to tactics unacceptable to citizens of the free world. But in democratic societies, I think one of the most important antidotes to these activities is the strength of civil society. This is not all bad, since it gives us a relatively robust immune system to guard against manipulation by foreign actors. But our resistance can and should be strengthened by vaccination in the form of education, communication, and political action. Hence, the importance of our meeting here today and the efforts of people like Ms. Ley and our new organization, the International Freedom Alliance. I count the business leaders I have met in China, many of them at least, including party members, as among the smartest, most rational people I've ever known, eager for China to take its place among the great nations of the world. And after all, China is the home to one of the world's great civilizations. Mm-hmm. For thousands of years, it has made cultivating virtue based on ethical behavior its central leadership principle. But China erred in thinking, as Mao explained to French author André Malraux in 1965 that what China needed to do was, quote, destroy China's thought, culture, and customs so that the thought, culture, and customs of proletariat China, which does not yet even exist, could be born, unquote. With its experience of the past 75 or so years, I would challenge Chinese leaders to question whether, rather than marching into the future on the foundation of the values inherent in its 5,000-year-old heritage, it is still reasonable to base China's future on an absurd philosophy artificially grafted onto Chinese history and culture, which insists that labor is the primary activity by which human consciousness develops, to the exclusion of all other possibilities, including spiritual, psychological, cultural, aesthetics, philosophical, and historical, and which eschews all moral standards for judging what is good and right in favor of acquiring more and more power in the name of a utopian dream and the mythical architect of a messianic proletariat. Its current course would seem to me to be nothing more than a long march to nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry. Thank you very much. You're an ideologist at heart.
That I almost made that my career instead of law.
Well, let's open the floor up now for comments. I'd like to ask Frank to join me on the spotlight here, and I'd just like to begin with one question for Lei, and that is about the organization, Lei, of the Chinese Communist Party. Where does the United Front Works Department fit within the framework of the way the party is organized?
In terms of organization, it's just a ministry, right? You have the Ministry of, just like Foreign Ministry or Defense Ministry, you have the Ministry of United Front Work. But so, yeah, it's just, it's almost like a PR organization, public relation organization for the party. That's what it's set up for the real purpose, right? The real purpose is this is our party's public relation department doing, trying to be a goodwill ambassador around the world, build relations. That's what it's supposed to do. But we know it doesn't do that. And you can't really say there's anything wrong with that. It's just that other government wouldn't have this department. Other government wouldn't have the budget to have such an elaborate organization doing public relations, because you don't need to. Voters wouldn't approve that. We don't need public relations, but the Chinese, the CCP does. Yeah.
No, it's not. It doesn't have any real central position in the party. Just one of several ministries.
Yeah, it does have an organization, and it does have you have a minister, you have a deputy minister, you do have officials holding these positions, but their program is to recruit and control the local diaspora communities, engage the Western elites. It's almost like the front facade of their intelligence. They work with the intelligence, the MSS and the public security and even the military. In the old days, the Chinese PLA runs China's intelligence organization. And then Xi Jinping changed that.
Oh, I see. I didn't understand that. Okay.
In the early days, in the 90s, that's why the vice chairman of the CMC came up with the strategy. The military was very dominant in the intelligence operation in the early days.
It was part of the PLA until like 2012.
Until I think Xi Jinping changed that. He wants to make the MSS, the Ministry of State Security, more powerful. The military still does its own intelligence, but he kind of tried to balance everything out.
And the United Works Department is only involved with overseas public relations, as you put it.
Overseas, they don't deal with Taiwan. They may deal with Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is really a different part
Yeah.
of China. Yeah.
Okay. So here's a question from someone in the audience, John Dixon. How realistic or serious is the Trump administration or people in the administration in identifying and opposing the CCP? I mean, how aware are they of the activities, I believe the question is, of in the United States of the United Front Works Department?
I'm sure they're very aware. Didn't President Trump say something during his term that every minute there's a FBI case opened and it involves China? Like the bulk of the work FBI has is to investigate someone related to China, linked to China. So it's part of the unrestricted warfare, because there are 4 million Chinese living in the U.S. At least 4 million. There may be more. Some people say 6 million. And the CCP sees them as their assets. It has nothing to do with their political, but because these people still have families or business or connections back home, the CCP can manipulate them.
I see.
So,
Even though they might not be enthusiastic about the CCP, right, they can still be used by the CCP.
They still could use, yeah, or anyone, or CCP can, because they know you so much, and they could design a program to make you work for them, because everyone has pain points, right? They study you so much, they know your pain point. And then just at the right moment, they'll offer you something that you can't refuse, and then you start working for them. So that it's an uneven game, and there's no way the U.S. government can have the budget trying to stop a foreign adversary trying to turn 4 million people against you. What are you going to do?
Well, you might remember there was a discussion about a year ago. There was 600,000 Chinese student visa applications, and the Trump administration made a decision to not accept a single one. And then shortly after that, they changed their mind. They accepted all 600,000 applications, which didn't make any sense to me, because I know for a fact at the universities that I've been to that these Chinese students are there for many of them are there for political reasons.
Yeah, it's not good. I don't know what really made them change their mind. But I mean, if people are here to study music, I'm sure it's okay, right? If they're here to study piano, violin, or language, literature, it's relatively okay. But you still have to find out who their parents are, how their background. Yeah, it depends on the subject of study.
There's a question here from a guest from Canada, wondering about the situation with regard to the United Front's Work Department in Canada.
Oh, Canada.
Do you think about that?
Canada is worse. Canada is very bad. Canada has, I mean, I didn't talk Canada because it's not on your list.
Right.
But Canada, I would say the 3 countries that I worry the most. In Asia, it's South Korea. In North America in America, it's Canada. In Europe, it's Spain. These 3 countries are they're CCP can enter like no man's land.
I think you've also mentioned Australia is infiltrated too. Is that correct?
Australia is, but Australia is also bad.
Perhaps less consequential.
Yeah.
Here's a question, a comment from for Gerry Willis from Dr. Andrew Wilson. Gerard, you talk about the role of the Chinese ideology on Chinese behavior, but isn't it the case that China has a deep history of unconventional warfare going back to Sun Tzu? I personally don't think that communism is more than a convenient label to cement loyalty to the current emperor than a governing principle, especially given the role of the business community in China's prosperity. But China still nurses a deep resentment against the West and wants to get revenge by gaining the position of the dominant power in the world like they used to in ancient times?
Andrew,
Yes.
uh, that requires more than the 2 or 3 minute
Yeah, right.
answer. Yes, you, I'm not suggesting we look at things simplistically. Um, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Xi Jinpingism is a source of legitimacy as well as a motivation. Power politics often trump ideological interests. Um, but for example, the Chinese business policy could be, analogized to NEP under initiated by Lenin after he cratered the Russian economy after his take by immediately following Marx's prescriptions, economic prescriptions. They opened it up again for a decade in order to recover. What we've seen, there was a time, I'll be honest, when, notwithstanding my background, and Ms. Lay, I spent like 10 years in the Cold War from a intellectual and journalist point and other activist point of view, looking at these issues, including East-West. But it's easy to see that there was a time where there was a debate. They even had an organization examining religions around the world to see what would be applicable within China and helpful to creating social harmony, which was actually one of the themes of Jiang Zemin. And I was, notwithstanding my deep suspicion and distrust and experience with communist groups and countries, there was a little spark of hope in me that perhaps maybe they would become, a stakeholder in the international system rather than a revanchist hegemon, which is what they've become under Xi Jinping. And I said at one point, it's going to be hard to reverse all this. Someone is going to have the will to kill a lot of people in order to return to the semi-Mao days of China. And sure enough, Xi Jinping, and he instituted the anti-corruption campaign, and all of the business leaders in China were clapping great because they had to grapple with corruption in their daily business. And I said, this looks awfully like a red purge, which is what indeed it turned out to be.
That's
and
right.
he was able to turn the ship so that now it is pursuing more thoroughly and systematically what I would call goals and systems and techniques that can be found rooted in an interpretation and understanding of Marxism, Leninism, or Marxism. I mean, I trace Stalinism back to Marx. I don't think there's any way to save it. But that's way beyond our discussion here tonight.
But isn't
Thank you,
another issue
Gerry.
that this idea of Sun Tzu would be a Chinese rooted, I guess, system of thought based upon the indigenous culture, whereas Marxism, Leninism is based upon German philosophy. It's totally out of place in China. And that's why
But because Sun Tzu exists in China, there's a root there for Marxism to take root. It's not totally alien. Maybe that's another way of putting it.
Well, Sun Tzu is I love Sun. I have a quotation from him hanging on my office wall. A general who knows neither his own thoughts or his enemies will lose every battle. One who knows his own thoughts but not his enemies will win 50% and lose 50%. One who knows both will win 100%. And I use that in business, not because I view business as warfare, but one of the things we need to understand is how China looks at the world. I find them incredibly rational. I find it easy to work with them. Most Americans go over and want to blow their brains out after 3 months, and mostly then they go home. Some survive, but you have to put in your 10,000 hours in order to even begin to understand the complexity and intricacy and really the beauty of Chinese concepts and ways of thinking.
I put 10 years of efforts into trying to develop Chinese customers, and I think I sold about $5,000 worth of product in 10 years. But
well,
I guess, Dr. Wilson,
I never failed to close a deal that I got involved in.
Oh, good for you. You're a better man than I.
Well, no, only in China, in a very narrow specialty.
But I guess, Dr. Will, you're suggesting there was a basis in the history that was made Marxism, Leninism not so foreign as it might have been otherwise. Is that your?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's the last question from Michael Kellett. I think this is a very good one, Lei, for you, because this has come up a lot in the United States. How serious are these Confucius or Confucian clubs that have emerged around the country? How would you?
Is he talking about the Confucius Institute?
Yes.
Oh, those are undercover, United Front undercover operations, disguised as an educational institute. But they're being shut down in the U.S., haven't they? But there are other projects. There was a new project that came out with a different name that does the same thing. And they're also online. I think there are many online programs, Chinese educational online programs in the US, language teaching initiatives, offering to Americans, teaching Chinese. A lot of those are operated by the Chinese. Yeah. So you shut down Confucius Institute, and then you have like dozens of others prop up.
We had an interesting experience in our church. We had a CCP spy in our church.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then the CCP has cultivated a class of anti-CCP dissidents. You know that? There are within the dissident communities, there are ones that are CCP agents.
Wow. Oh, I see. They're like double agents sort of a thing.
Yeah, because this is how CCP controls the dissidents. And these people are very outspoken. They're very vocal.
Yeah.
But then if you follow them long enough, you know that on key issues, there is like 95% of the time, they'll be speaking against the CCP. Then 5% of the time, at crucial moments, they'll speak in favor.
I see.
Yeah.
They're positioned to create credibility at the right time. Well, we should at some point talk about what to do about all this, but we're not going to get there tonight. I would love to ask Dr. Kaufman if he'd like to raise any issues or before we close. It's been very interesting, Lei and Gerard. We really appreciate it. And Dr. Kaufman, would you like to add anything before we close?
Just a word. It'll remain an open question because we don't have time to get into a response. But I've been curious about is there any genuine patriotism among any of these three classes of people serving the CCP? Is it entirely fear-based, exploitation-based, monetary-based, or among these three classes of agents of the CCP, are there any who are genuinely acting out of pride and love of country and culture? Open-ended question. And then the second question is, and I think you've touched on it because of what you call the pain points, but I wonder if just the mere experience of a free society and of the lack of constraint and fear along the rails along which Americans move, sometimes like dumb oafs, but just as happy as can be. Does that have any attraction or draw some of the committed agents away from this narrowly bound life of serving this behemoth of the CCP that controls their lives, even if there is money to be made? Those are a couple of my curiosity or question.
So if you look at those three types of people or agents, the professional spies are very difficult to unless they're double agent, like the CIA will turn them into agents that work for them as well, because they're professional. And I think it has nothing to do with patriotism. It's just their job, right? They do it because it's their job, not because they love China or whatever. So I think for that type, it's a matter of, will the CIA be successful in turning them into double agent? Now, the second type is very interesting. The second type has two subtypes. The first subtype is similar to the pros, but the class of business executives, okay, I think it has nothing to do with patriotism. I think it has to do with their own ambition, because they become who they are as a result of this intelligence operation. That's part of the deal, right? We were going to use our influence to set you up as a successful businessman in the West, right? And then that's alluring to many people. And so if they go against that, they're going to lose everything they have. So I think it's economic, it's ego that they can't let go. And then as far as the third type, many are just ordinary people like you and me. I think they were probably many of them are trapped, because they were in a situation that they can't get out, and then the CCP offered them a solution at the right time, at the right place. So they agreed, and then once they agreed, then they're trapped. Many of them, started working for them like that. But I think there are some that are patriotic. And then also there are people who are offered, a lot of the community leaders in the US, many of them are offered with lucrative business deals in China. It's all because of money. Yeah. So I think it has nothing to do with patriotism.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lei. Interesting. We have Bill Gertz from the Washington Times is with us this evening, which is really nice. We're really happy he could be with us. And he has a comment here in closing about these Confucius Institutes. He wrote, at one time, there were over 100 of the institutes. Many have been closed, but the Chinese have changed the names of many and continued operating them. They produce big money for U.S. universities.
Yeah, that's I concur with what Bill says. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to Lei. Let's give Lei a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd love to hear more about this anti-cult, activity that's affiliated with the CCP. If there's any way to get that was raised by Gerry Willis.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Sure.
It was established in 1999. It was first used to persecute Falun Gong.
Yes.
And then now it's used on, Christians, the churches, and everywhere. It started as a Falun Gong persecution arm or tool. Now it's for everyone else, or other religious groups, I should say.
Well, Lei, I will have to tell you that we feel we're at war with them right now, which is why we're having this meeting this evening, because we need to understand more what's really going on in these countries, because it's heavy. It's really, really heavy for us.
What do you mean by heavy?
Well, our co-founder's in jail right now.
Mm.
And our church has been, as I told you before, our church has been dissolved in Japan. And as Gerry said, as soon as that decision was made, like the next day, maybe you could restate that, Gerry, that they sent a letter, this anti-cult department sent a letter of congratulations to the Japanese government. They were so happy with what the Japanese government had done.
I think we should offer, because many governments don't understand that CCP is a theocracy. It's a it's a religion. It has all the formality of a religion. So the people that it fears the most are the people
like
with
us.
true faith. Yes.
Yeah.
That's why they persecute, religions.
Yeah.
And so for governments to understand this, they need to support religious communities.
Yes.
You know, if they just treat CCP as a government to deal with it, to negotiate, they're gonna fail miserably.
Yeah.
The only people who can stand who can, I should say, effectively counter CCP's influence are people with true faith.
Yeah.
And this is,
And that's why they attack. That's why they oppose them.
Yeah, and then this information should be given to our government so that they understand the best strategy. Because even Mao Zedong, the only people that he feared are true religious people.
Yeah.
So it's a strategy.
Yeah, they're afraid of Dr. Frank Kaufman. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gerry. We really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here. Very informative evening. We really appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you very much, Jim. Thank you, Lei.
Thank you.